Just wanted to go over some books and then kind of read some highlights from this one, Origin of the Bill of Rights by Leonard Levy. It's pretty good. It kind of I wanted to go over like the chapter on the Establishment Clause or so, and I don't know. It's kind of like it kind of goes against both the liberal and conservative position on establishment of religion. Like just talks about how it meant specifically. What is it called? The impression that I got was that basically it mainly was about established state churches or so, or like basically religious corporations that are funded by government or so. And so it did not mean generally all religion or anyone's religion. Like it just meant specifically the churches, the institutions, and but goes against the conservative position because I think the conservative position is it's about favoring all churches on a non-preferential basis or something, like taxation, or not taxation but government funding. But this book kind of goes against that. Says that they already had that, and when it said that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, it means it does apply to like even on a non-preferential basis. This chapter is chapter 4. This is the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause. I'll just read some like highlights or so. Like here, it just says that a right that has no superior is the first mention. Freedom from a law respecting an establishment of religion. Establishment of religion. Some historical memories associated with religious persecution. So the classic establishment of religion is, it denoted a legal union between a state and a particular church that benefited from numerous privileges not shared by other churches or by the non-churched or unbelievers. An uncontested and incontestable fact that stands out from the Establishment Clause is that the United States cannot constitutionally enact any law preferring one church over others in any manner whatsoever. So, the Chief Justice W.H. Rehnquist, does what he said have any validity? He says in 1985, he declared in dissent in Wallace versus Jeffrey that the, quote, well-accepted meaning, end quote, of the Establishment Clause is that it merely prohibited the establishment of a, quote, national religion, end quote, which he defined as the official designation of any church as a national one. The clause also, quote, forbade preferences among religion, sects, or denominations, end quote, but it created no wall of separation between government and religion, not even between church and state. Quote, the Establishment Clause, end quote, Rehnquist wrote, quote, did not require governmental neutrality between religion and irreligion, nor did it prohibit the federal government from providing non-discriminatory aid to religion, end quote. And then here it says, but the clearest proposition about the Establishment Clause is that it limits power by placing an absolute restriction on the United States. Quote, Congress shall make no law, end quote. Alexander Hamilton in the Federalist, where he concluded simply, quote, for why declare that things shall not be done which there is no power to do? Why, for instance, should it be said that the liberty of the press shall not be restrained when no power is given by which restrictions may be imposed, end quote. When there is no power to attack, it is idle to prepare the means of defense. End quote. That's a big, let me see. It says Wilson, Randolph, Madison, and Speight had attended the Philadelphia Convention. The remarks show that Congress was powerless even in the absence of the First Amendment to enact laws on the subject of religion, whether in favor of one church or all of them, impartially or and equally. It says in 1790, before the ratification of the First Amendment, Madison opposed the inclusion of ministers in a list of occupations to be covered in the first census bill. He reasoned that, quote, the general government is prescribed from interfering in any manner whatever in matters respecting religion, and it may be thought to do so in ascertaining who and who are not ministers of the gospel, end quote. The understanding at the time of the term, quote, establishment of religion, end quote. Some states, however, proposed amendments that included a ban on establishments. New Hampshire, the ninth state to ratify, was the first to urge an amendment on the subject. Quote, Congress shall make no law touching religion or to infringe the rights of conscience, end quote. It says here, it says Rhode Island also recommended an amendment on the subject. And Virginia copied verbatim by North Carolina and Rhode Island, urged that, quote, no particular religious sect or society ought to be favored or established by law in preference to others, end quote. This is the constitutions of Pennsylvania, New Jersey, North Carolina, Delaware, and New York use the language of no preference. Yet all five, including the three that had never supported an establishment of religion, relied on private support of religion. In other words, they believed that a constitutional provision ensuring no subordination of one sect to another or providing no preference of one over others banned government aid to religion. Massachusetts, by contrast, maintained an establishment of religion by its Constitution of 1780, yet endorsed the principle of no preference. It says Madison's objective in introducing the amendments that became the Bill of Rights, its, quote, great object, end quote, he said, was to, quote, limit and qualify the powers of government, end quote, to prevent legislation in such forbidden fields as religion. He declared that the goal of, quote, restraining the federal government, end quote, could be achieved by ensuring that, quote, the abuse of the powers of the general government may be guarded against in a more secure manner, end quote, than in the unnamed Constitution. As Madison consistently informed Jefferson, the Bill of Rights was not framed, quote, to imply powers not meant to be included in the enumeration, end quote. It says, when Madison introduced his amendments, the clauses on religion read that no one's civil rights should be abridged, quote, on account of religious beliefs or worship, nor shall any national religion be established, nor shall the full and equal rights of conscience be in any manner or in any pretext infringed, end quote. In one respect, that constituted a vast improvement over the final version of the First Amendment's clause on religious liberty, which merely guarantees against a law, quote, prohibiting the free exercise thereof, end quote. This is said it is not part of the First Amendment that it should not be construed a la Rehnquist, as if it were still a part, and as if the ban against a, quote, national religion, end quote, authorized non-preferential assistance to all faiths. Madison nevertheless continued to employ the phrase, quote, national religion, end quote, raising the question on whether he favored non-preferential aid to religion. He did not. He had led the fight in Virginia against the, quote, General Assessment, end quote, Bill of 1784, which would have imposed taxes on to subsidize religion. Madison did not oppose that bill because it referred too narrowly to Christianity, and no one for or against the bill thought that its extension to Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and other religions would remedy any defects. Madison opposed the bill because he opposed any kind of establishment of religion, no matter how inclusive or exclusive. Proponents of the bill declared themselves to be on the side of God because they praised religion and its many benefits. Madison replied that the question was not whether religion was a good thing, but whether establishments of religion were good for religion, and he decidedly thought not. He did not believe that religion needed government support any more than government needed religious support. He argued in his famous, quote, Memorial and Remonstrance against religious assessments, end quote, that religion was not an, quote, engine of civil society, end quote, that the establishment contemplated by the bill differed from the Inquisition, quote, only in degree, end quote, not in principle, and that any establishment violated freedom of religion, injured religion, corrupted government, and threatened public liberty. Madison, in fact, had an exquisite sense of the separate jurisdictions of religion and government, and he shared Jefferson's belief in a high wall of separation between the two. He spoke of a, quote, perfect separation, end quote, and believed that, quote, religion and government will exist in greater purity without the aid of government, end quote. And for the phrase, quote, national religion, end quote, he used it to describe federal use of public funds for the support of interfaith invocations and benedictions, congressional and military chaplains, and a law incorporating a church in the District of Columbia, all of which he believed to be unconstitutional. His antagonism to government-assisted religion was extreme, even as to trifling matters. Says, what then was the understanding in 1789 of the meaning of the term an establishment of religion? Doubtless any union of state and church comparable to the familiar European establishments of religion came within the prohibition of the First Amendment. Such establishments of religion had weak counterparts in the tidewater towns of the sovereign colonies before the American Revolution, where such an establishment existed. Attendance upon its services was supposed to be compulsory, unless the government indulged the open existence of dissenters. But only the official creed of the established church could be publicly taught, and only its clergy had civil sanction to perform marriage services, and other sacraments, or could allow them to be performed. Only clergy of the established religion received stipends paid from religious taxes and imposed on everyone, regardless of faith, and only the churches of the establishment were built and maintained by those taxes. Dissenters, even if tolerated, suffered from the imposition of various civil disabilities, such as exclusion from the universities and disqualification for office, whether civil, military, or religious. So their orphanages, schools, churches, and other religious institutions had no legal capacity to bring suits, hold or transmit property, or receive or bequeath trust funds. This is according to William Tennant, a Presbyterian minister of South Carolina, in which the Church of England Episcopal had been established. Protestant dissenters were merely tolerated as if they stood, quote, on the same footing with the Jews, end quote, unmolested but unequal, except in Rhode Island. Second-class citizenship also characterized non-congregational Protestants in the New England colonies, where for all practical purposes the Congregational Church enjoyed the preferences of the established church. By banning laws respecting an establishment of religion, the First Amendment meant indisputably that Congress could make no law concerning the sort of establishment that characterized Lutheran Sweden, Anglican England, Roman Catholic Spain, or Presbyterian Scotland. The question is whether an establishment of religion signified anything other than a church with preferred status or official privileges. In fact, Europe's post-Reformation model of an establishment of religion was barely known in America, if at all. By the time of the Revolution, the term establishment of religion came to have a far broader meaning in America than it had in Europe. To begin with, American establishments had never been as powerful or as discriminatory as their European counterparts. Tennant may have felt merely tolerated in England, Charleston, but further west in Carolina, Anglicans were few in number. Their clergy was almost non-existent, and all churches were equal, in fact, and discriminatory laws had no real operation. By the time of the Revolution, the interior of the sovereign colonies had been populated with Scottish-Irish Presbyterians and various German sects and denominations. A bewildering multiplicity of religions existed in the middle colonies, none of which had ever endured an establishment of religion. And in New England, outside of Rhode Island, where state and church had always been separated, Congregationalists reaped the benefits of an establishment not because their church was by law established, but because a nondescript establishment of Protestant ministers on a local town basis operated in favor of the overwhelmingly numerous Congregationalists. Nowhere in New England was the congregational church established by name. So the American experience with establishments of religion was unknown to 18th century Europe. As a matter of fact, at the time of the framing of the Bill of Rights, every one of the 6 states that still maintained an establishment of religion in the United States had multiple or general establishments of religion. An establishment of religion had come to mean government support, primarily financial, for religion generally, without legal preference to any church. For all practical purposes, and surely for all legal purposes, the states that authorized establishments in 1789 established all churches within their borders. This is New York's colonial history of church-state relations provided the first example of an establishment of religion, radically different from the European type. An establishment of religion in general, or at least of Protestantism in general, and without preference to one church over others. After the English conquered New Netherlands in 1664, the, quote, Duke laws, end quote, named for the Duke of York, later James II, fixed the governance of New York and made provisions for the regulation of churches in Long Island. Any church of the Protestant religion could become an established church. In a sense, of course, this was an exclusive establishment of one religion, Protestantism. But the system involved a multiple establishment of several Protestant churches, in sharp contrast to European precedents, which provided for the establishment of one church only. Under the, quote, Duke laws, end quote, every township was obliged publicly to support some Protestant church and a minister. The denomination of the church did not matter. Costs were to be met by a public tax, quote, every inhabitant shall contribute to all charges, both in church and state, end quote. A local option system prevailed. On producing evidence of ordination, quote, from some Protestant bishop or minister, end quote, the minister selected by a town was inducted into his pastorate by the governor representing the state. In other words, this was an establishment of religion in which there was a formal, legal, official union between government and religion on a non-preferential basis and without the establishment of any individual church. In 1683, the New York Assembly enacted a, quote, Charter of Liberties, end quote, that adopted the Long Island system of multiple establishments and extended it to the whole colony. It says, in the 1750s, the organization of King's College, later Columbia, provoked the controversy over the nature of New York's establishment. Anglicans demanded that they control the new school because they enjoyed, quote, a preference by the Constitution of the province, end quote. Non-Anglicans rejected both claims. A young lawyer and a future framer of the federal Constitution, William Langston, denied that the Anglican Church was exclusively established in the colony. He insisted that the establishment, quote, restricted no particular Protestant denomination whatsoever, end quote, and that the people were to choose which ministers to establish. Here again is the evidence that the concept of a multiple establishment of religion was understood by inhabitants of colonial New York. Although New York Anglicans claimed an exclusive establishment of their church, a large number of the colony's population understood the establishment set up by the Act of 1693. Not simply as a state preference for one religion or sect over others, but as allowing public support for many churches to be determined by popular vote or so. Popular vote. Says 3 of the 6 states were in New England. Massachusetts adopted its constitution in 1780. Article 3 of its Declaration of Rights commanded the legislature to authorize the, quote, several towns, parishes, precincts, and other bodies, politic or religious societies to make suitable provision at their own expense for the institution of the public worship of God and for the support and maintenance of public Protestant teachers of piety, religion, and morality, end quote. It's the same article empowered the legislature to make church attendance compulsory, and it authorized the town and parishes to elect their ministers. In addition, the article stated, quote, and all monies paid by the subject to the support of public worship and all the public teachers aforesaid shall, if he require it, be uniformly applied to the support of the public teacher or teachers of his own religious sect or denomination, provided that there be any on whose instructions he attends, otherwise they may be paid towards the support of the teacher or teachers of the parish or precinct in which the said monies are raised, end quote. It's clearly an establishment of religion in Massachusetts, meant government support of religion and of several different churches in an equitable manner. And then it says Congregationalists continue to be the chief beneficiaries of the establishment because they were the most numerous and resorted to various tricks to fleece non-Congregationalists out of their share of the religious taxes. It says, but the fact remains that Baptist, Episcopal, Methodist, Unitarian, and even Universalist churches were publicly supported under the establishment after 1780. Massachusetts did not separate church and state until 1833. This is a New Hampshire State Constitution of 1784. Also created a statewide multiple establishment with a guarantee that no sect or denomination should be subordinate to another, As in Massachusetts, all Protestant churches benefited it. The multiple establishment in New Hampshire ended in 1819. Connecticut, like Rhode Island, did not adopt a constitution during the Revolution. Its establishment of religion was regulated by the Act of Toleration of 1784, which was enforced when the Bill of Rights was framed. So the statute empowered each town to choose which minister to support and guarantee that no sect was to be subordinate to the other. So in Maryland, where the Church of England had been exclusively established, the Constitution of 1776 provided that no person could be compelled, quote, to maintain any particular place of worship or any particular ministry, end quote. Thus, establishing the Episcopal Church, but the same Constitution provided for a new establishment of religion, quote, yet the legislature may, in their discretion, lay a general and equal tax for the support of the Christian religion, leaving to each individual the power of appointing the payment over the money collected from him to the support of any particular place of worship or minister, end quote, Christian, end quote, rather than, quote, Protestant, end quote, was used in Maryland because of the presence of a large Catholic population, thus ensuring non-preferential support for all churches existing in the state. In 1785, the Maryland legislature sought to exercise its discretionary power to institute non-preferential support, but, quote, a huge uproar arose against the measure, end quote, and it was denounced as a new establishment and decisively beaten. So in 1810, the power to enact a multiple establishment was taken from the legislature by a constitutional amendment providing that, quote, an equal and general tax or any other tax for the support of any religion, end quote, was not lawful. Here it says South Carolina's Constitution of 1778 was the sixth state constitution providing for a multiple establishment of religion. Articles 28 elaborately spelled out the details for the maintenance of the quote, Christian Protestant religion, end quote, as, quote, the established religion of the state, end quote. Adult males forming themselves into any religious society of a Protestant denomination were declared to be, quote, a church of the established religion of the state, end quote, on condition of subscribing to belief in God, worshiping Him publicly, regarding Christianity as, quote, the true religion, end quote, and accepting the divine inspiration of Scripture. Pursuant to this law, Baptists, Independents, Methodists, and Anglicans qualified as, quote, established, end quote, churches. The state also specifically guaranteed that, quote, no person shall by law be obliged to pay towards the maintenance and support of a religious worship that he does not freely join in or has not voluntarily engaged to support, end quote. This is clearly the provisions of these 7 states show that shows that to understand the American meaning of, quote, an establishment of religion, end quote, one cannot adopt a definition based on European experience. In every European precedent of an establishment, the religion established was that of a single church. Many churches or the religion held in common by all of them, that is Christianity or Protestantism, were never simultaneously established by any European nation. Establishments in America, by contrast, in both the colonial and the early state periods, were not limited to in nature or in meaning to state support of one church. An establishment of religion meant government aid and sponsorship of religion, principally by impartial tax support of the institutions of religion, the churches. In no state or colony, of course, was there ever an establishment of religion that included every religion without exception. and 3 of the 7 multiple establishments existing in 1791, the establishment included only Protestant churches, and in the other 4, all Christian churches. In effect, all Christian churches of each of the 7 states were establishments of religion. Christianity or Protestantism may signify one religion in contrast with Judaism, Buddhism, Hinduism, or Islam, but no European establishment of religion included all the churches within national boundaries. All European establishments of religion denoted a single state church, that is, the church of one denomination. No member of the First Congress came from a state that supported one church or an exclusive establishment of religion. No such example could have been found in the America of 1789. The experience told the legislatures in 1789 that an establishment of religion meant not just state preference for one religion, but also non-preferential support for any or all. At the time of its ratification in 1791, the Establishment Clause prevented the United States from doing what half the 14 states then permitted, giving government aid to religion on a non-preferential basis. For a broader standpoint, the Establishment Clause was also meant to depoliticize religion, thereby diffusing the potentially explosive condition of a religiously heterogeneous society. By separating government and religion, the Establishment Clause enables such a society to maintain some civility among believers and unbelievers, as well as among diverse believers. Above all, the Establishment Clause functions to protect religion from government and government from religion. So I thought that was an interesting chapter. And then, so I like his views because he's a separationist, but he favors religion, right? I did find like his other books. Let's see. This one, the Establishment Clause, Religion and the First Amendment, by Leonard Levy. This his book he also wrote. There's more detail on the Establishment Clause, just to kind of see his views on it. And then also his other book, I found this one from the same author, called Blasphemy. It's a verbal offense against the sacred from Moses to Salman Rushdie. This kind of goes over the transformation of the word blasphemy, and it's like how it transformed to heresy, and maybe back to back to blasphemy or so. Some of its contents are the origins of the offense, the Jewish trial of Jesus, Christianity transforms blasphemy, compelling heretics, Protestantism rediscovers blasphemy, the fires of Smithfield, Socinian anti-Trinitarianism, or anti-Trinitarians, the Ranters, antinomianism, run amok, the early English Quakers, Christianity becomes the law of the land, early colonial America, Gordon and the Quakers, America from 1660 to 1800, England's Augustan Age of Toleration, Blasphemy and Obscenity, the, quote, Age of Reason, end quote, Eton to Carlyle, Deism for the People, Carlyle, Shopman, and Free Expression. Some other stuff. I thought it was pretty interesting on this subject. Let's see, it's like, what is it about? It's just like, the preface says, this book is about the suppression of freedom of expression in the field of religious belief and experience. It is also about an inchmeal progression in the scope of freedom of expression. The past depicted here should not be forgotten or emulated. James Madison said, whilst we assert for ourselves a freedom to embrace and observe the religion which we believe to be of divine origin, we cannot deny an equal freedom to those whose minds have not yet yielded to the evidence of which has convinced us. If this freedom be abused, it is an offense against God, not against man. To God, therefore, not to man, must an account of it be rendered. Figure quote. Continuing, it says, abuse of freedom as distinguished from its appropriate use or licentiousness, as opposed to liberty, has always been the excuse for suppression. What society deems to be blasphemy, a verbal offense against sacred matters, may differ with time and place, but whatever is condemned as blasphemy is always regarded as an abuse of liberty. any definition of the scope of freedom of religious or irreligious expressions necessarily require the drawing of lines and limits, perimeters against the impermissible, separating blasphemy from the expression of lawful opinion on religion, reveal that society will not and cannot tolerate. Blasphemy is a litmus test of the standards a society believes it must enforce to preserve its unity, its peace, its morality, its feelings, and the road to salvation. The period covered by this book is approximately 33 centuries from the time of Moses to a 1992 opinion of the Supreme Court. During most of that time, very few blasphemers were irreverent scoffers, casting verbal opprobrium upon religion. Atheists and irreligious railers did not become the usual victims of blasphemy laws until the 19th century. For most of history, blasphemers had been devout Christians, although obnoxious to the majority of Christians among whom they lived. Even the homosexual centurion of the poem that featured in the gay news case of 1977 recognized Jesus as the Son of God, but the centurion, like most blasphemers, offended Christian sensibilities. The history of the crime of blasphemy raises the question why blasphemers of God should not have been tolerated. If the blasphemer of a pagan god was spared because that god could avenge his own honor, Judges 6:31. My sympathy for Arian and Unitarian beliefs and for Christian victims of persecution is evident. The first section of this book covers the history of the offense from ancient Jewish thought to the Reformation. Christianity grossly inflated a narrow Old Testament crime until distinctions between heresy and blasphemy disappeared. The first generation of Protestant reformers tended to gag on, quote, heresy, end quote, of which they stood accused by Roman Catholics, Roman Catholicism. They rediscovered the scriptural term, quote, blasphemy, end quote, to blacken the dissidents within their own ranks. That early history of the offense provides an essential background to its Anglo-American history, which is the primary subject of this book. Incidentally, for the sake of convenience, I refer to the offense of, quote, blasphemy, end quote, without distinguishing blasphemous utterances from published blasphemy. For biblical quotations, I use the Revised Standard Version. The subject of blasphemy forms the basis, at least implicitly, for a study of the struggle for intellectual liberty in general and religious liberty in particular. Freedom of religious opinion, like the origins, the scope, and limitations of freedom of expression, have long concerned me. The history of the offense of the blasphemy has always lurked in the background. My first book included a chapter on a blasphemy case. When I wrote a study of the origins of the Free Press Clause of the First Amendment, I focused mainly on seditious libel, but discovered that another major category of libel was blasphemous libel. When I studied Jefferson's record of civil liberties, I learned about his lifelong interest in opposing blasphemy laws and the common law doctrine that Christianity was part of the law of the land. When writing Origins of the Fifth Amendment, I learned that persons resorted to the claim that they should not be forced to incriminate themselves in cases of political crimes, seditious, libel, and treason. And in cases of religious crimes, heresy, and blasphemy, the subject of blasphemy has pursued me for nearly 4 years. I have written on it before, but never whole as here. For me, the subject is a vital aspect of the history of First Amendment freedoms. So a brief word about acknowledgments dictates that I mentioned, and he goes on to talk about like Daniel Bailey, people that most of the you proofread all these things. That's basically what this book is about. Yeah, cause like a while ago, what's his name? Living Orthodox. Yeah, the guy like it was because he was making videos. No, he said he's like responding to monophysitism, like he said he's going to make a video saying about the Christology, right? Because you know my views on the Christology, that I don't believe it to be true, like consistent. The traditional understanding of Christ, the hypostatic union thing, and just trying to make a video and like responding to the idea that the Chalcedonians have the same Christology as the Monophysites or whatever, or the Orthodox have the same Christology as they do. And I was like saying, like, I forgot what I said to him, but Yeah, he basically accused me of blasphemy or whatever, and he just like ban you. But that's usually what they do. It's like somebody's Orthodox, they just like don't want to respond to what I've said, and they just don't say anything. But no, they just avoid me, I guess. I just thought that was ironic because I was like, yeah, I was thinking about this book, and so I haven't read it yet, so I can't really comment on it. And then just a few other books I wanted to mention. Like, this one is uh, Fake Founding Father Quotes Examined. Were the founders atheists or deists by Dave Miller. Yeah, this goes over all of the quotations that both the Christian and secularists like to use when they argue against me, when I talk to them about like Christianity, right? Like America's a Christian nation, right? But it's like they think in terms of sectarianism, like traditionalism, but now I'm looking at like the religious ethos, the religious consciousness of the country, right? Its religious heritage was mainly tied to the Christian religion. That is how the country is conceived in, right? And how the American constitutionalism doesn't really tie into the secular Enlightenment ideas. That it's also mainly based on, like, as far as its religious principles that like Madison was talking about. That it is also, in the spirit of the Christian what's it called, covenantalism. They basically the charters, covenants, and constitutions of the pilgrims, or so the Christian, like where you would find a lot of natural law, Christian natural law tradition in those things. And now American constitutionalism is also based off of that. And so you can't just take it like a variable of secularism, right? Like you can't just, like secularists do, interpret America through a strict secular lens, and then you just kind of explain away the religion as though it's not there, right? It's like secularizing religious history. You're just going to ignore the Christian church, right? So it's not as though it didn't exist. And so they just interpret things in a strict lens of secularism. At least that's been my impression when dealing with them. And then the Christians, like the secularists, right? But the Christians mainly fixate on non-Christian elements of the founding, like they mentioned, like what was it? Theism, Masonry, and secular Enlightenment or so. And it's like, I don't know, to me, like if you wanted to know how America was Christian, you would look at if there is what I said, like a religious ethos, religious consciousness, or religious heritage, right? Because clearly America has that, and it's foundational to the reality of the American reality, right? Like when John Adams talks about the Bible being a Republican book, or when John Adams and Washington talk about Jehovah God, right? The God of the Jews and the God of Christ. His God is the God of the Republic, as they themselves have confessed. And that certainly that they keep the Republic within the biblical consciousness, right? Even if there is no established sectarian church. And that, like I was saying, though, like they appeal to non-Christian elements to decide that it is not Christian because of that. And it's like, no, it's Christian because it has all of the things that I said, right? And that it's no similar. I mean, it's no different than saying that like America's government is a federal constitutional republic, right? And it has some democratic elements, and it's like people who keep insisting that it is like a democracy, right? Like a full-blown democracy, because they appeal to the democratic elements of the form of government, I guess. And so that's why I say that just because there's democratic elements, right, it doesn't make it not what it is, which is a federal constitutional republic, right? And it's the same thing with like if there's non-Christian elements, that doesn't make it not a Christian nation or so. You know what I mean? It's like even when you look at theism, Masonry, and secular Enlightenment, like none of which the founders referred to as true religion. Like when they spoke about true religion, they always presupposed Christian religion in the way that they envisioned it, which was based on general principles of Christianity, which is based off of the system of morals and religion of Jesus, which they all agree, especially the so-called theistic founders, what this book deals with. It's like they all venerated Jesus as God, like his interpretation of the law, right, of Moses or stuff, and then the kingdom gospel, the covenant consciousness, right, and yeah, his God, like I told you. Like all of that is venerated by all of these founders, especially the so-called theistic ones, you know. And so they did not believe just in God and no religion, right? Like some of them try to appeal to providential theism, when it's really just like God without religious practices or so. It's like a human enlightenment or something, like God without religion, basically. But I told you that, you know, like based on the books that I've read and I've recommended on here, like they do favor both God and religion, and particularly Christian religion and the God of the Bible, right? Including the Hebrew metaphysics and the New Covenant consciousness and kingdom principles, right? Like that also ties into the religious ethos of the country. And so it's not really this secularized country, right, without religion. And then that's what I'm saying. Like theism is really not considered religion, because the reason why they favor, like the secularists favor the founders being seen as like theists, is because it makes them irreligious and closer to like atheists or so. Atheistic kind, right? Like the French revolutionaries believe in God, but not like religion or so. It's definitely against what the founders were saying. And same thing with like humanism. It's like Christianity without God or so, like almost like that. But they no, they favor God because they have plenty of views, especially from the book that I like, which was I think it was called The Founders and the Bible by Carl Richards, right? It goes over all the things they agreed upon when it comes to the God of the Republic, because what their personal views of God or personal deities or whatever opinions they have, like it is not the same thing as the established God of the Republic. It's like they did favor God, like divine judgment, future rewards and punishments, right, and things like that. So it's not really compatible with just a humanistic religion, which doesn't believe in all of that. And Masonry is not really considered religion. Like, as religious men, right, they all believe in different gods, but they share the Masonic principles in common or something. It's like a secret society, because I know like some people say that it's incorrect to call it a religion. And then secular enlightenment is not a religion. It's not even religious. It's just like a position of neutrality on religion, right? Like it totally lacks religion. So none of these things can define the religious ethos of America. And so that's why I'm saying that these are not really good positions to take against America, like being a Christian nation, or even the evils of America. They'll show you in the Bible, like how God constantly has to chastise ancient Israel, right? Or his chosen nation, right? I say they are not without wickedness. Like everyone struggles with that, right? So it is holy, it belongs to God, but that does not practice holiness, which is why it gets judged. Yeah, how God refers to them as a stubborn people, you know, wicked and stuff at times, right? It's just a disobedient nation, basically, which is why I expect it to be judged severely for all the evils that it's done in this day and age, right? This country. Because ultimately it's supposed to be a model nation for God. And so, what else? Yeah, but like I was saying, like this deals with, like, what are some of the quotations? It's like, it says here that this study analyzes a number of quotations that commonly appear on atheist and politically liberal websites and in books written by intellectual elites of academia that purport to prove that the founding fathers were atheists, theists, agnostics, and otherwise irreligious individuals who had no attachment to Christianity and who intended for Christianity to have no part, for Christianity to have no part in the founding of the country. It's a fact that most of these quotes are either fabricated, manipulated, or taken completely out of context. Fact: American society was built by men, the bulk of whom were highly moral, believed in Christian morality, and who integrated biblical principles into the new government. Typical quotations by 7 founders are examined with a view toward ascertaining whether the quotes are, quote, faked, end quote, including, it says, these 2 are from John Adams. It says the quotes that they use is like, this one quote, "This would be the best of all possible worlds if there was no religion in it," end quote. And the other one from supposedly John Adams, right, that they like to quote is this one. It's like, quote, "The government of the United States of America is not in any sense founded on the Christian religion," end quote. Like I already made a video on this one, on how the federal government is founded upon the Christian religion, how it's always participated in Christian tradition with the Thanksgiving and prayers and things like that to the divine being, right, God. And how that I forgot what else I said. Like how I would say that God gave me a good answer to this one as well. And obviously this book deals with the rest of them, which you could find. I'm sure you could find the answer to these online, but the book, I guess, gives its take on it, like this author. And let me see. It says this one's from allegedly James Madison, right? Where he supposedly said, "quote religious bondage shackles and debilitates the mind and unfits it for every noble enterprise." End quote. And then obviously these other two quotes are supposedly from Thomas Jefferson. It says, quote, "Christianity is the most perverted system that ever shone on man." End quote. Quote, "History, I believe, furnishes no example of a priest-ridden people maintaining a free civil society, a free civil government." End quote. And this other one, supposedly from Benjamin Franklin, he supposedly said, quote, "Lighthouses are more helpful than churches." End quote. So it goes over putting these quotes in the proper context. And it has like some pictures. And so pretty much deals with a lot of these quotes that are constantly used to make our founders look like a bunch of antichrists or so. Just like a lot of these Christians, these like theocrats, basically, or anyone else that does not believe that God established our government, right, or our country. Like they always try to cast doubt on it so that they can make it more of what they consider Christian, which is why like the secularists doing this, making our founders look like antichrists, right, it actually hurts them, because Christians will always gravitate towards what does it mean to be a chosen nation, right, like a Christian nation. So Christians will always like be more motivated towards like moral obligation, right, because Christians are covenant-minded people. And so it's not really liberal democracy that motivates us, it's the covenant-mindedness, because we believe that the country is established by God, which plenty of your founders, and the nature of your founding, do justify believing this, and that it is more American or consistent with the American founding to believe in the spiritual Israel, right? Because to me, it's not just about Christian nationalism. Like I still can't figure out what exactly is Christian nationalism, because there's so many like definitions, right? Like I think I have a couple of books over there on that. But to me, it's more about being a spiritual Israel, which is clearly the very nature and you could say providential identity of the country was rooted in that understanding of itself. And so that is where I think that should be preserved. That consciousness or idea or ethos, right, soul, like that understanding of the country should be preserved, right? And I'm not saying that has to be like theocracy or whatever. Like, I'm not talking about that. And I have other books. Hold on. Sorry. Yeah, I have other books. Just want to go over just a few more. Like this one's from a Rabbi, Daniel Lapin. This is America's Real War. That's what it looks like. And it just says that an Orthodox rabbi insists that Judeo-Christian values are vital for our nation's survival, right? Because he understands like the founders read from the Hebrew Bible, so there's the Hebrew metaphysics, right, as well as the New Covenant consciousness. That's why I say that America has a biblical consciousness, its culture, its reality, right, its identity, its soul, basically. It's a religious consciousness that I believe is just being neglected by the secularist. And this is like here it is. Back in the back it says, "Are we one nation under God, indivisible?" And it says, "In 1999, America's Real War. An Orthodox rabbi insists that Judeo-Christian values are vital for our nation's survival. Explained why, quote, as committed Jews, we fight to preserve America's Christian heritage." The response to this book was overwhelmingly a bestseller. The book was responsible for launching a long-needed but unprecedented alliance between Jews and Christians. Although the book went out of print in 2006, we kept on getting requests for it. So just talking about the success of the book. And down here it says, "America's Real War argues that the real chasm in American culture is not between black and white, rich and poor, men and women, Jews or Christians. The real divide is between those Americans who believe that Judeo-Christian Bible-based values are vital for our nation's survival, and those Americans who believe that these timeless truths obstruct progress. There are blacks and whites on both sides, just as there are rich and poor, men and women, and yes, Jews and Christians on both sides. Most importantly, the book persuasively answers perhaps the most frequently asked question posed by millions of Americans curious about their Jewish fellow citizens. Why is such a disproportionately large percentage of American Jews more committed to the secular liberal values of today's Democratic Party than to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The enemies of traditional values, and indeed of religious Jews and Christians, are out in full force. Many readers of America's Real War think thus we're giving practical, rational, and easy-to-follow arguments to support their positions. The book helped them analyze politicians' words and see the underlying reality. It allowed them to see and share ideas with their children, extended family, and friends that laid bare anti-godly agendas that are often masked by seemingly innocent language. Since we wrote this book, a great deal has happened. However, the original principles in this book are still true today. Instead, after receiving so many requests for America's Real War, we are making the original text available again. So that's basically what it says in the back. It's like the part one is refocusing our outlook. It just goes to like chapter 1. This is, why would a rabbi ally with religious Christian? So chapter 2 is striking the iceberg, and the curious rise of anti-Christianism, a strange double standard, generation by generation, cultural war, origins and destiny, the rejection of God, only one way works, the isolation error, looking the wrong way, and then part 2 is reaffirming our roots, spiritual gravity, another look at our roots, why our Pledge of Allegiance was changed, the prevailing epic, America, a unique haven for Jews, and other one like goes over our foundation, Judeo-Christian tradition, faith influence on technology. It goes a lot of like politics and stuff, like culture. So yeah, I thought it looked interesting, so that's why I bought it. This one is Kingdom of God in America. I just what was it about again? I just looked. It's from the Wesleyan, I think. Yeah, by Martin Marty. That's what it looked like. It just says introduction. It says the Kingdom of God in America is the classic interpretation of American religion as of half a century ago. It remains a classic reflection on the Protestant roots and ethos behind pluralist America and its religions today. So those two sentences impel the writer to have to define, quote, classic, end quote. They can mean many things. Here it refers to the kind of work from which one cannot again break free once the work has made its statement. Thus, Froude may have undergone 1,000 revisions and rejections, but no one who has encountered Froude can conceive of the psyche as she lay before the encounter. Marx, it is said, has hardly remained recognizable after all his revisers and rejectors, yet it is impossible to reconceive the world of economics and class existence apart from the statement he made. One may be anti-Darwinist, but still must be somehow post-Darwinist, for it is with Darwin that later evolutionary controversialists must agree. So it is in that context that one may perhaps must speak of H. Richard Niebuhr's book as a classic, after confronting Niebuhr, an informed person who knows something of America's spiritual landscape. The contours of its religious experience may find many reasons to be revised. To revise the location of some landmarks and may repoint to some signposts. It is Niebuhr's making and posting, not those of any other candidates who come to mind, that make possible and necessitate such reworkings. Having thus addressed the concept of the classical and of this work was a work as a classic, it remains to pick up on a nuance also tucked into the first two sentences of this introduction. The first sentence refers to Niebuhr's satisfactory summation of American religion, and then the second to the more restrictive notion of the Protestant roots and ethos underlying contemporary pluralism. Something must have happened since, quote, half a century ago, unquote. It says, indeed, something did happen. The mainstream white and male Protestant world, whose hegemony Niebuhr could take for granted is no more. Not that Protestants have folded their tents and moved out. Line up 100 Americans today and ask them their religious preference. Among them, 24 will be content to describe themselves as, quote, moderate Protestants, end quote. 16 as, quote, conservative Protestants, end quote, and 9 as, quote, liberal Protestants, end quote, and 9 more, although they counted for little in the dominant Protestantdom of Niebuhr's time, as, quote, black Protestants, end quote. 58 Americans should have cultural power to eclipse that of the 25 Catholics, and the 7 who have no religious preference to the 2 or 3 who prefer Judaism, and the 8 who are, quote, all others, end quote. While America may be 3/5 Protestant in preference, the Protestants do not come in sufficiently coalescent or cohesive form to dominate as they did when Niebuhr reckoned with, quote, the kingdom of God in America, end quote. Today, the religious celebrities come from, quote, conservative Protestantism, end quote, as in the world of televangelism and Christian rock music, embodiments of experiences unforeseeable by Niebuhr. He dealt with their grandparents as the poor of the earth, the culturally despised outsiders. Today, historians' curiosities are directed more to the other kinds of once upon a time outsiders, New Age partisans, Mormons, quote, cultists, end quote, or whatever, who writes about Congregationalism, Episcopalian, or Presbyterianism and expects a readership. Talks about World War II and history of these things. So, the raw and rich pluralism of American life came to challenge the Protestant domain. Today's Americans debate how to get an argument over values started. They live, it is said, in disparate and incommensurable universes of discourse and have lost even the terms of common life. It says even those who would reject them have to know them, says the historian concerned with cultural literacy. This is mainly like a Protestant book, yeah, but I liked the idea of what it was saying about the kingdom of God, and I just wanted to see what it would say or so. I haven't read it yet, so I'll probably read it later. So these other ones, as the 3 volumes, Guns and American Society by Jacqueline Schildkraut and Greg Lee Carter. This is like the first volume. It's like an encyclopedia of all these topics: history, politics, culture, and law. Have to do with guns in America. This is volume 2. Volume 3. Pretty pricey. It goes over Reagan, Ronald Wilson, 1911 through 2004, Republican Party and gun control, and right to self-defense, philosophical basis. It goes over all this other stuff. This is a pretty 3-volume encyclopedia. So it's interesting to help understand that, that whole debate or so. So if you like any of these books, then feel free to check them out. Of course, that's why I wanted to show them off. And anyway, if you like my videos, please like and subscribe. Hopefully I came off clearly. I was kind of tired. But anyway, in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Thank you and God bless.